So, hi, this is Miriam, and this is Mr. Atkinson, my history teacher, and he has kindly accepted my request for interviewing him for my English project, The Neo Imperialism. So, I just want to say at the beginning, if it weren't for the war, I wouldn't be here sitting with you doing this interview, actually. Okay, so let's start with the questions. The first one, in your opinion, was the war in Iraq a war of necessity or a war of choice?
I
And
think it was
why?
a war of choice. I don't think, despite how the war was sold at the time, that the United States had to go to war in Iraq. I think that the way that it was spun by the politicians was if we don't go to war in Iraq, that that it will negatively impact the United States, that eventually that terrorists could end up knocking on your front door in the United States, even though there had not been any direct link between Saddam Hussein's government, which was a terrible government, and terrorism from 9/11. But the government made it seem as though if we don't go to war in Iraq, then we will not be truly fighting terrorism. So I think that looking back, it was definitely a war of choice. It was not a war that the United States had to fight.
Okay. The second question is I'm just gonna give you stuff and you arrange them. So, oil, weapons of mass destruction, removing Saddam Hussein from power, being close to Iran, backing terrorism, and having a hand in 9/11. Which one you think is like the necessity, is like the most necessary of them?
I think removal of Saddam Hussein from power. I think that when the Bush administration, when Bush became president of the United States, I think ultimately that was one of his goals as president of the United States was to remove Saddam Hussein from power. That was, we look back on it during the Gulf War in 1991, that was one of the mistakes in hindsight that the United States probably made was not pursuing Saddam Hussein and the Republican Guard back into Baghdad and removing them from power. And I think that that was a cloud that hung over George Bush Sr.'s head. And I think that his son saw that and to a certain extent wanted to get retribution for his father.
And yeah, so wasn't there any other way to remove him from the power other than the war?
I think in the past, something that the U.S. had tried after the Iraq War, after the Gulf War, was to support Shiite groups and support the Kurds in the north and support groups that were against Saddam Hussein. But ultimately, Saddam Hussein showed that he was willing to use any means necessary to defeat opposition to him. So I don't know, other than military force, if there was any way to get Saddam Hussein out of power. Even though, as we look at it now, it was a war of choice, and in my opinion, it wasn't in the best interest of the United States to do that. But ultimately, I think that's the only way that they could have done that.
Okay, so if we go back in time, would the war take place again?
It depends. I think if you asked George W. Bush, I think he would have done it again. I think that people who believe in the same things that George W. Bush believed in would have done it again. I think that if we had had another president like Al Gore, who was nearly elected in 2000, I don't think Al Gore would have gone to war. I don't think that many politicians would have gone to war. But I think it hinges upon who was in office, who would have been in office.
Yeah. And from your point of view, was the war needed?
No, I don't think it was needed. I was under the, I was in college when it happened, and I was against the war. I didn't think that it was necessary, but I always thought that at the end of it, even though it wasn't necessary, that Iraq will one day be a better place than it was under Saddam Hussein. And over the last number of years, I don't know. I mean, you would know better than I would. I don't know, is it a better place now or when Saddam Hussein was in power? And I always thought someday Iraq will be better than it was under Saddam Hussein, but I don't know if that's actually true now. So.
So what were your views as early as 2003 about the war, and what are your views after the war ended?
So originally in
Yeah.
2003, like I said, I was opposed to it. I was a senior in college when it happened. So we had small protests on campus and things like that, and I attended them. I wasn't very outspoken about it, but I was against it. I didn't think it was right. But I always thought, like I said before, that Iraq would be a better place in the long run after Saddam was gone. And today I think, who knows? I don't know that that was right. And so many things happened because of the U.S. war. Right? The rise of ISIS can be traced to the Iraq War. Iran being more powerful, that can be traced to the Iraq War because it created a power vacuum in Iraq, and Iran jumped on it. And Iran's a more powerful nation now because of what happened in Iraq. So I was opposed to it then, and I still think it was the wrong thing to do. But I wasn't opposed to the individuals who fought in that war. I think that what they did was was brave. So like Vietnam, right? Don't dislike the soldiers, you could dislike the policy.
Yeah.
So
So, why it is, in your point of view, the U.S. has the largest and most expensive embassy in Baghdad now, with 5,500 Americans, 1,000 regular employees, and 3,000 additional staff members?
I think the U.S. has to, from the government's perspective, has to maintain a presence in Iraq, and has to make it seem like the U.S. hasn't abandoned the country. And I think over years and years of being there, the U.S. built up an awful lot of business there. You know, there were a lot of things that happened during the war with American companies going to Iraq, but governmentally, from that perspective, I think that the U.S. Wants to still establish a presence there. In case the U.S. ever has to go back to Iraq, though I don't think there's the stomach for it, that the people don't have the stomach for it, but I think that they don't want to seem as though they're abandoning Iraq.
And do you think the U.S. have a role in the government right now, in the Iraqi government?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all that much about the day-to-day role of the United States government in Iraq's government, but I know, like, in the aftermath of the war, the U.S. certainly had an awful lot of say and stuff like that in the role of the Iraqi government. So I think the U.S. for the foreseeable future will play a role in the region and will play a role in Iraq's day-to-day activities. So.
Okay, and on a scale from 1 to 10, do you think U.S. had achieved their goal?
With 10 being absolutely? Is that...
Yeah.
Okay. 3. I would go with 3. Saddam Hussein was removed from power, but the idea was Saddam's going to be removed from power and Iraq will become like the United States, and it'll become like this thriving democracy. That hasn't happened. Saddam's not in power anymore, but I mean, it doesn't mean Iraq's a better place than it was. So I would say 3, not very much.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.